Hello, everyone out there. My name is Kelsey Dillo. I'm the gallery manager here at Arrowmont School of Arts and Crafts. Welcome to our third discussion in our Instructor Roundtable series. So our goal here is to highlight the talented artists that were scheduled to teach at Arrowmont this year. We want to discuss ideas in contemporary craft, and we want to strengthen our connections within our community. Check out the 2020 instructor exhibition on our website for more information on Arrowmont's instructors and their work. I want to remind our guests at home that they're going to be muted during our chat today, but we encourage you to post questions throughout the discussion in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We're going to do our best to get to as many of them as we can towards the end of our chat today. More information about our panelists will be shared in the chat bar, and today's discussion will be recorded and posted on our website and YouTube channel later in the week. So today we're talking with 4 artists whose work relates to the theme of sustainability and craft. Our panel today includes Jim Arendt, textile artist, gallery director, and educator in South Carolina. Peter Dellert, multimedia artist, educator based in Massachusetts. Ashton Ludden, printmaker, educator, and sign artist in Tennessee. And Sonya Philip, artist, designer, and educator based in California. I want to thank all of y'all for being here and taking the time to participate with us today. Our panelists are going to give an introduction to themselves, and then we're going to get into some thoughts on sustainability and craft. Jim, would you like to start us out with an introduction, the workshop that you were scheduled to teach here at Arrowmont, and your work as it relates to sustainability?
I grew up near Flint, Michigan, on a farm. Everybody I knew worked in the shop or worked in and around the industries that were located there. And so I had kind of a front row seat for some of the changes that our economies experienced. Typically when I come to Arrowmont, which is a great place to be, I like to teach crafts based in kind of a make-do ethos, which is kind of the aesthetic principles that I managed to hang on to right through my artistic education. So make do really means that you look around for the materials at hand and you work with what's available. One of the things that I'm always trying to confront in terms of being able to sustain a creative practice is things, the big 3, I call them, the big 3 excuses that all the artists have. Peter, you know this one. There's never enough time, there's never enough money, and there's never enough space. And so we really have to work on deconstructing those things and telling people it's like we have to learn to work with what's available to us all the time if we're going to maintain some type of creative practice. And so a lot of my work is based in materials that I find that resonate with the stories of the people that I grew up with, working class materials. Sometimes it's denim, sometimes it's concrete. We like to quest around and kind of look for things that have a truer resonance. When I was in art school, I was studying drawing and oil painting, and I had an instructor who's like, well, what do you think oil paint means? And I don't think he intentionally set me down this road, but it was one of those questions that the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it was not the appropriate material to reach for to solve the problems or to tell the stories that I wanted to tell. So the stories of working class people's lives, the people that I know and care for, needed some type of different material, right? Oil painting was developed to depict the flesh of gods and kings, and I was talking about something else. So this was a chance for me to do that. A lot of my material, people often ask me, oh, you must go to the thrift store all the time. And I'm like, nope, I haven't bought material in 8 years. Generally, I turn to small audiences like this and I say to them, I lean in real nice because I'm living in South Carolina. So I say, hey, y'all, how you doing? Anybody got any jeans that they're ready to retire? And my material literally comes to me from the sense of like generosity and conspiratorial insiders who want to be a part of the action. And I get all these little boxes from all over the country that people send me. Just, sometimes it's a short stack. Sometimes people have cleaned out their closets and they bring me everything they have. And usually what I like about it is that they bring it to me half apologetically. Denim for a lot of people is one of those materials that they don't just wear, but they wear out. And so those are the stories that I'm actually mining the material for. I'm looking for the ability to kind of use the material as a collaborator with the stories. And so there's stains and there's tears and there's all sorts of imperfections that come to me that people are a little sorry about, but I often tell them, I'm like, those are the ones that I need. And so I feel bad to cut into a pair of jeans that has life left in it. I'm often regifting them to people. I'm like, look at these ones, they stretch. I've got so many jeggings. Anybody want some jeggings? And that's the way in which my materials come to me. And, you know, growing up in agriculture and around manufacturing, I learned that one of the systems of work, there were two present systems of work. I mean, we'll have a chance to talk about this later, and I'll give it up to the next person, but there were closed systems and linear systems. A farm is a closed system, ideally. It's the type of system where you don't have any inputs. The cows eat the grass, the sun feeds the grass, cows fertilize the grass, and you have this nice closed loop of sustainability. Factory work was different. Factory work was linear inputs, right? It was like raw materials from one place, processed in another place. And then if you were lucky at the end of it, you could recycle some of those materials back into new steel or something like that. So there was always these two competing systems of work that was whole and undivided, which I really enjoyed, and work that was more piecemeal. My chickens are being loud. I hope nobody's bothered by my chickens. Be quiet, girls. Why don't I turn it over to somebody else? Kelsey, did I hit all the points we wanted to talk about?
That's great, Jim. Thank you. Your chickens are great. Peter, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. I tried to mute myself. Am I live? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Peter.
All righty. So I'm going to read this just to stay on track, and I'm not so good at this, but I'm Peter Dellert. I'm from Holyoke, Massachusetts. I've lived here a long time, grew up in Maine. So I started as a potter with clay, which is a natural resource. You all know that. After a summer at Silo in North Carolina, building a solar heated earth bermed dormitory, I fell in love with carpentry and all the tools and the ability to construct buildings. And from that, I sort of morphed into a woodworker, wood also being a natural, sustainable resource. My most recent furniture used a lot of live edge wood, the wood edges with the bark, the wane still on it, book match boards from locally harvested trees. I like the idea of using local wood. I was never much attracted to exotic woods. I felt like using imported rainforest woods was not the way to go. A lot of the wall cabinets were made from what most folks would call firewood, sometimes limbs or street trees that I would just come across as I was driving around locally. Many of the boxes, I built these wall cabinets that were doors over boxes. Many of them were heavily collaged or contained collections with natural themes, such as birds or water or fishes. And recently, the newer ones have become more like reliquaries, personal reliquaries. And I taught a class at Arrowmont either in 2015 or 2018 with the box format as the focus. It was very, very fun and very successful. And I'm still exploring both that format and the potential content within that format. But around 2005, I started making just pure collages, no function, art for me, which was a breakthrough, with natural materials like leaves and wasp nests, sycamore bark, onion skin, garlic skin. And the first of these actually was made at Arrowmont in 2005 with sycamore bark that I had collected on a hike up in the Smoky Mountain National Park, which you can access directly from campus. If you don't all know that, next time you're there, check it out. You don't have to drive. You can just walk off campus into the park. I'd like to transform the material. That's one of my criterions for art making. Even though Duchamp is a hero, I still think you need to manipulate the materials, and you find your own way how you do that. So I press the leaves and then I cut them into tiny squares, about 3/8 of an inch on each side. And when they join together, they make sort of a pixelated imagery, focusing on inherent textures and colors in the leaves, sometimes difficult and odd material, but I love bringing the nature directly into the work. The color palette is subtle and infinite. I recently collected this year's hydrangea flowers from a bush in my front yard, and these will be a lovely pinkish white. And I've used many odd things like tomatillo husks and tomato skin, but the leaves are mostly what I use in these collages. And in my travels, I've even smuggled home such things as bougainvillea, and from these I get a nice a pink magenta color. So also concurrent with the collages, in the early 2000s, I began making sculpture in addition to my furniture practice. And I experimented using recycled materials early on, things such as tin cans, rusted metal, found car parts, specifically automotive catalytic converter covers that had dropped off of cars, and I found one at a time in the road over a long number of years, and I built a piece out of them. And so sometimes just the challenge of discovering a material such as tin cans and then figuring out how and what to do with it will drive the creative process and get me going. And I've also used sustainable materials in my sculptures such as grapevines, tree branches or twigs, bamboo, paper mache. All these things are readily available if you just look around and see what you have, as Jim was saying, using what's at hand. Depending on where you are and what your facilities are. So paper mache is very versatile, and I introduced this material to my most recent students in a class very much like the one I was to teach at Arrowmont in October, and I hope we get to do such a class in 2021. It was called Sculpture with Recycled Materials.
Awesome, thanks, Peter.
So, okay, is that enough?
Oh, you got one more minute, go for it.
One more minute.
Yeah.
Regarding sustainability, I recently made a piece with grapevines, 400 or 500 feet of them, collected near a local orchard, where the finished piece was to be installed as part of Art in the Orchard, a biennial here in the Valley. It was called Obsolete Oil Can Fountain. It was in the shape of a vintage oil can, but would now function as a fountain and a watering station for birds and bees. The backstory here being we have to stop supporting oil culture and start looking for sustainable green solutions to our energy needs. I'm a big supporter of this concept and have been since the first Earth Day in the 70s. Solar power is where we should be looking for solutions, and wind and even harnessing the tides. My city here in Holyoke is 100% water powered with a generating station on the river since about 1900. We have some of the lowest electrical rates in the nation. Currently, I just had a show using recycled garden tools like shovels and rakes, but just the metal bits. And then I fabricated laminated wood handles to them to repurpose them and make them into sculptures. And I could go on, but there'll be hopefully time for that because Jim said some things which really rang true with me, and I'd like to interact with those whole concepts about the worker and the worker's tools and the state of the worker, especially in the current economic situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Ashton?
Hi, everybody. Y'all can hear me fine, I hope. My name is Ashton Ludden. I've received, let's see, I'll tell you who I am. I'm a printmaker primarily. Been doing a lot of other things recently, but that's what my education and background is in. I got my undergrad degree at Emporia State University in Kansas. I originally went there because I'm from Kansas City area originally, kind of stayed in state to save money, thinking art therapy. They had an art therapy program that I kind of got into, but studios, of course, stole my heart and stayed, and they actually were introducing a 4-year degree program in engraving arts. So I started out before printmaking. I was doing gun engraving, not gun engraving, but I studied with firearm master engravers and learned to cut metal. And then they hired a tenure track person, James Ellers, who is a amazing printmaker and engraver, and he came and kind of helped me introduce me to printmaking. So I kind of, that's sort of where I got into printmaking, doing engraving. And then I don't remember going to grad school. It just kind of happened, you know, like I don't even remember applying. It just was the next thing. I think we really had minimal printmaking at my undergrad, and so I was very interested in all the different processes, which is why I like it a lot. So I came to Knoxville to go to University of Tennessee in printmaking for my master's. And shortly after that, this was kind of, it was in that in-between stage where I'm like, what am I doing after school? And my friend at the time, I hadn't shopped at Trader Joe's before. They had just came to Knoxville not too long ago. And at the time in my my graduate work, I was doing a lot of, my prints were about our relationship to animals, and particularly domestic animals that we eat. So I kind of had this narrative called the Meatimals, which I'll tell you real quick. The spiel is tender and sweet, they'll lie at your feet. With succulent meat, it's the pet you can eat. So the idea behind this series that I did was to kind of eliminate the meat industry and pedigree animals, where you can kind of have your food and your companion all in one little convenient package. But it was also very dark and messed up, because that's what you do when you try to shove all the things and conveniences into one thing, because it just, you sacrifice things. So so when this job at Trader Joe's came up, it kind of advertised, hey, do you like food, and are you artistic? And I was like, well, that's kind of a perfect step into that. And I originally got that job thinking it was kind of a temporary position for me. They didn't have a full-time sign person. For those that don't know, Trader Joe's has is a private grocery store that has, every store has their own sign person there, or at least a team. And so when I got hired, they didn't really have anybody full-time. They'd only been open for a little over a year. And I have been there for 6.5 years now. And I have been kind of helping them build that team up. And now I'm kind of starting to step back and pass the torch. That's kind of where I started doing lettering, which this particular print that's up right now is very early on in me starting to get into lettering. But I was kind of starting to bring the humor that Trader Joe's has into starting to think about our relationship with wildlife, instead of, like, I kind of had gone through this domestic animal thing, and then I started thinking about how distant our relationship also is with wildlife, and kind of starting to think about advertising. And I really learned at that job how little the attention span of people is right now, because I'll make huge signs and people are very focused on what their agenda is. And I think that's kind of how we feel with a lot of issues, like a lot of things in the world. Like, you can get stuck in your own world so easily and never pay attention to things that are very important in the world and will affect you, you know, maybe not right in this moment, but indirectly. And I think this indirect effect with things in the world is something that I was starting to kind of get more interested in. Like, how do I get people to care, you know, or especially with things that, particularly with animals that we'll maybe never ever see in your life. So that's kind of where I think Trader Joe's has been a really interesting job over the years, and it's been a great job. It's a great family. I love working there. And I picked up a whole new skill set too. Like, I didn't do any lettering. I kind of convinced them I could do it. I brought in my Meatimal prints originally. And so I picked up lettering, which again came into my work now. And the other thing I actually did at work once was talking about sustainability. The company has actually been doing a lot in trying to improve their sustainability process at the company itself, within our own recycling, and then also recycling in the city, and trying to understand that. That's also been a big debate. So we do these food tastings each week. Well, we used to, COVID's changed all that. But instead of focusing on the food, I was like, well, let me do a presentation on like what our company does in trying to reduce plastic. And that's kind of been a criticism of theirs over the years that they're working on. And so a lot of these things, like one thing we can't recycle is these plastic box bands. And I've been collecting them for a while, and now my fellow employees have been helping me collect them. So I have a bag and we're kind of in my sign department area, and they just deposit it. And they're not on every box. It's just a handful of boxes, like some of the really heavy things. And so I started doing these weavings, and this thing in this picture on the left is actually that little linear piece is actually a bunch of pull tabs from like creamers and things. So this is a kind of a newer body of work that I'm simultaneously working on while I still try to make prints. That a lot of my prints are more like narratives and trying to, like visuals of trying to talk about things I read in the news or issues in the wildlife. Like that very first one was of the hemlock woolly adelgid that's invading the trees in most of the eastern part of the US, and interested in invasive species and endangered species and our relationship or lack thereof. So yeah, I don't know if that's answering any of these questions or how long I've been rambling, but that's kind of, like I was telling before we started, I'm kind of starting to get to this point where I'm doing a bunch of different little things and trying to kind of refocus it. But yeah.
Thanks, Ashton. Sonya?
Well, it's been great listening to everybody. I've been like taking notes. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good thing. That applies to me. But my name is Sonya Philip, and I'm a textile artist. My education was not in crafts or art. I came at a sort of like left turn. I'd always been interested in art, but ended up with an MFA in creative writing. And a lot of that is I was a single mom, and when I was going to school, I couldn't justify scheduling art classes in my schedule. And so, these long blocks of studio time. So I kind of didn't sort of sacrifice that, but found my way back into art, mainly through craft and textiles. And I work in small series, and a lot of the materials I would use would be found materials. The pieces that are on the screen right now, they're knitted, but they're on postcards of old shows, because it's like you'd have open studios and shows, and then there would just be this stack of postcards and left over. And I wouldn't, even though they were out of date, something inside me wouldn't be able to just toss them. And I think that's coming from just also my upbringing of, having my mother's from the Philippines, and there's that, like, living in a country where it's like you keep hold of things. You don't just discard things. You never know when they'll be useful. And so it's trying to give things a second life, trying to reuse. I also had a series called Ordinary Objects, popping up on the screen here too, where it was my attempt to transform and have this dialogue between, objects which are trash. That started off with a coffee cup, because walking around San Francisco, it seemed like, back in the 80s, you would see cigarette butts everywhere, and now that had transformed into coffee cups. Coffee cups were the new cigarette butts, that you would see them, just sitting on top of garbage cans on the sidewalk. And so it's just this idea of, how can you take a lowly object, garbage, trash, and transform it. And so, I just started cutting holes and knitting in the objects themselves. And I can't remember how many I ended up making, but several and people would bring me things, I would find things, and they would, just all sorts of boxes to birth control pills, signs, wrappers, and sorts of things. So, and what I've been doing much more lately, and actually the class that I was scheduled to teach next month, here it is, was a project called 100 Acts of Sewing, where I made 100 dresses in a year and documented the process. And since then, I've started teaching people how to sew, just because that whole idea of the skill of making a functional piece of, say, your clothing and your garment, and I think it really fosters an appreciation of how much skill it takes to make clothes. Because, and this was a discussion that someone on Instagram was having, just that whole idea of handmade. And when you talk about handmade clothing, which it's this sort of real separation, because really all clothing is handmade. That we'd like to think of the stuff that you buy in the store, that you don't think about who makes it and what they're paid. But really, even though there has been a great deal of mechanization where, t-shirts that you have seams that are not there anymore because they're woven in tubes, and so they come together quicker. But really, they haven't mechanized the fact that someone is still pushing that fabric, along through a sewing machine, and that increasingly has gone from, it's been just to the lowest, lowest bidder from, China to Bangladesh to wherever. And I grew up for several years in Southeast Asia and Hong Kong, and have these vivid memories of, going bargain shopping with my mom. And we would go to, this was before there were outlet stores, and these were factory overruns, that it would just be in these, just areas where they would get sort of slightly damaged or rejected things, and there would be these piles of clothing that you would just go through. And that was, this like treasure hunting for me, and I loved it. But it was, I didn't realize at the time that this was just this massive, just extra that nobody was using. And it's gotten even worse as time has gone on with fast fashion, and that there's no seasons now, that we're just constantly wanting more. So my class at Arrowmont was to be called, and will be called when I get to teach it next year, Cloth into Clothes. And my focus has been much more now on really trying to utilize as much as possible. So instead of just, you could take a whole 2 yards, 3 yards, 4 yards and make something out of that, and you end up, with so much offcut and stuff not used. How can you take just small pieces and create clothing from that? And, as Jim was talking about, just that whole, like, when you have those limitations, that's when the real creativity starts. And when I taught a few years ago at Arrowmont, I had a lot of like other textile people, weavers, who were taking the class. And when you have these, like, if you are a sewer or a knitter or anything, or work in textiles, or like really any medium, you always have those precious things that you never want to use and cut into, and maybe it's small. And so how to put those things to use, and how to not have it be that you're just taking for granted that you'll always have this access to unlimited resources. And so that really kind of ties back into, it's not so much a scarcity mindset as it is just being conscious of how we use things and where they're going. And we have really a responsibility to not take it for granted. And I think we're seeing that so much more these days. And so, it's tying into using things responsibly, but also reusing. And I feel that when people acknowledge the skill, that then they're more primed to really, take care and think about what they have. And so maybe they're instead of sending those jeans down to Jim, they're going to patch them and give them more life. And, I think that at least for me personally, I'm more invested in things when I know the skill, and instead of just being this mystery of how, this just appears and I have no idea how it's made. I have no idea the amount of work that's put into things. And I feel that a lot of times people come to sewing clothes with a lot of fear and apprehension because you're using this machine, you're having to cut into cloth. And so I try and allay those anxieties by having it just like, let's start on the ground floor. Let's start with something really simple, just 2 pieces, put them together, boom. And it's not that whole home ec nightmare of having to deal with like 50,000 little pieces and that crinkly tissue paper. And so just really concentrating on, okay, let's figure out how to scramble these eggs and make it, and just get it so you're comfortable, and then you can build on it from there. And so yeah, that was, short and sweet.
Thank you, Sonya. So I'm going to hop into our questions, and some of y'all have already touched on the advantages of working sustainably in your craft, but what are some of the challenges that you face in each of your respective mediums in working sustainably?
I've made some really big, heavy concrete pieces, and they're hard to move around. And I just recently made a very light piece, skinny with the tools on the ends, but it was so big I had to deliver it on the roof of my van. So I've been working on outdoor sculptures, and so even if the material is sustainable, like the grapevine piece, that was 9 feet tall and I had to rent a trailer to deliver it. So there's always the issue of, oh, it'd be nice to be back in the studio making my small little boxes that hang on the wall, but I'm trying to reach different audience and I'm trying to sort of do different things. And so I don't like to have the end product or the difficulty limit me, but sometimes, yeah, it gets you in trouble just logistically on how to deal with things.
Yeah, sustainability is such a that's part of the creative challenge I think that I enjoy about it. It's a really multifaceted problem. It isn't just things like sourcing materials, or it's like, it's easy to say like plastic is bad. Well, sometimes it is, right? Other times it's a really miraculous material. And so it's a lot of what, for me in the studio, thinking around issues of sustainability, it amounts to, are we using things appropriately? And I'm going to throw to Sonya here in a minute, because I'm a sewer too, Sonya. And I know you get this question a lot. Everybody asks you which sewing machine is the best sewing machine to own, Sonya.
Yeah, well,
what my answer is, but I want to hear your answer first.
The best sewing machine? Oh, I don't, just one that I always tell people to get the one that you can afford. And I love vintage sewing machines, and, speaking about heavy, the ones that are all built in, all metal. But, just in hearing what you were talking about, I think sustainability has been a huge buzzword in fashion, and you can go down this whole rabbit hole as far as is what you're making, is it sustainable? Is it, or what you buying? Are you supporting a sustainable company? And then where's their fabric from? And where are those clothes made? Where is that fabric from? Where is it grown? And really, it's like, even if your garment is made in the US, where's that fabric from? 9 times out of 10, it's made in China, and it's milled in China, because we have really completely decimated the fabric milling operation here in the United States. And really, it's just about using less and consuming less rather than and making what you have go further rather than this like buy more, buy better. So, and I think that's the challenge. The challenge for me is I'm teaching people how to make things, yet it's like, okay, I want them to be a conscious consumer, but is it that instead of buying less clothing, now they're buying more fabric and just consuming that way? And you know, this is from somebody who has made, like, whose whole project was making 100 dresses, and, you know, talk about, you know, I don't know, just making for the sake of making. But
I find
That's
that
what,
a little bit like squeezing the balloon, right? It's if you apply
Exactly.
pressure to one area, you often see it distort, and you discover how those problems cascade in unanticipated ways. I'm going to give it to Peter here in just a second, but I wanted to say, it's like I get that question about sewing machines a lot. What's your favorite sewing machine? I always say it's my grandma's Kenmore. Her Sears 158 has served me well over the years. There's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with purchasing new, but I don't know if she anticipated when she made that purchase in the 1960s the longevity of that purchase, and that I would be essentially crafting my whole livelihood around that type of cascading lineage that she offered, and that it was even picking up that machine, right, was a way to say, this seems like something important, like changing your oil or balancing your checkbook, a life skill that people should have. Not necessarily that I ever thought that I would be the world's greatest sewer, but that I would learn something important through the making, which I think is one of the reasons that we all craft. Sorry, Peter, I stepped on you there.
no, and we could talk about tools and tool choices and tool use. And my sculpture has come to the point where now I'm making tools. I'm enlarging vintage tools to sculptural scale, basically to drive home the point that tools are wonderful. And in my preface, I didn't get to the paragraphs. I was rambling there about just that point about tools being essential, I think, for sort of creating soul in our lives, the ability to work with something, whether it's a sewing machine or a shovel, and that what you were talking about, Rust Belt workers, and you know, they spend their whole life in a steel factory, and that can be an honorable job if the factory owner and the factory worker can come to some sort of amiable relationship over generations, and those people aren't left, you know, starving when they retire. But now those jobs are gone, so the whole thing drives, you know, circular arguments about the tools you choose and the tools you use, and whether or not we're using tools, and how that implicates the future. I mean, there's all this talk now about essential worker, and yeah, a lot of the essential workers are not. I mean, nurses are tool users, but bus drivers, I mean, their tool is their bus.
Or delivery, yeah, or here.
Yeah, delivery
people, like
delivery
people delivering
people.
food and meals.
So now, if we go to drones, and Amazon is going to drop these things down our chimney like Santa Claus, even the delivery driver is going to be, you know, out of his job. So we need to think about. And in COVID, it's been so convenient to just go on the internet and order stuff and have it show up on the porch the next day.
Well, I'm sure that Ashton can attest to this. It's like one of the reasons that I got into making things was that I wanted more control over the direction of my life. And I've thought a lot about the nature of work, not necessarily like just specific jobs, like the difference between a factory worker and a bus driver, but to think about what makes work enjoyable. right? It isn't that we retire and never work again, right? That isn't the goal. You see people kind of shrivel up and die. It's that we have to have a wholeness to our work, a quality of completeness to it. And that's what's different about factory work in my estimation, is you never get to see the finished car, right? That was the problem. You only got to see the bumper. And that type of work is so chopped up that you can never, like Ashton, dream it up, right, Ashton, and execute it and convince somebody it's worthwhile.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Actually, you guys were I was thinking about all you guys have kind of talked on, like, all these different facets in your practice. And I feel like just being invited to do this talk for me has been really good, because I'm looking at y'all's work and I'm like, oh, I need to really reflect on even just process. And I always go to my ink, because I do still use oil-based ink, and I know there's other alternatives out there. And but the things I do in my practice that I feel good about, and part of this was initially not driven. I think I get it from my grandmother. She was just very thrifty, and I don't know exactly if that's just because, but I just like everything more minimal and neat, and that's kind of how I feel like the world is just cluttered with things. And like you were saying, like factory workers having a linear system, and those sewing machines last for so long, whether you wanted them to or not. Like, it's great that it lasted that long, but if, say, it broke, it would still be lasting as a physical entity on this planet, but somewhere else and out of your mind, not there. But like, for like all my shipping, I've been starting to think about, I really don't like to roll my prints for shipping. So I went to a local company where they sell cars, and they had a bunch of really double corrugated cardboard that was like in their dumpster. It hadn't rained. And so I have like probably a year's worth of shipping material now that I got for free. And was like, that to me just felt so, like, I was like, this is perfectly good. Why is this in the dump? Like, I could use this. And like, trying not to use, like, ordering cellophane for sleeves instead of actual plastic, like just all those little things that I think all the little things are the ones that add up and we forget about. And so I think like, I've been going hiking like a lot the last few years, and really exploring East Tennessee and all the little gems. And I pick up, this is another side project that I want to get going, is like all these little getaways, like the little, whether they meant to litter or not. And there's luckily not too much, but I do pick up and document everything I find on the trail. And I'm starting to like collect them even in my own life. Like when you guys have a zip bag, and they have that like resealable bag, you always have to tear that one part off at the top. And all of them are these convenience. They're like based off convenience, right? So, and they're just these getaways, or like when you tear open, oh, look, I have a protein bar right here. You tear this off, sometimes you tear that corner piece. For some reason, those, like, I think starting to become familiar, like seeing repeated offenders, kind of like the stupid floss pickers. I see those everywhere. I have on my Instagram, not on my website, but like I made a little print of life size of those on little Gompi paper, Japanese paper, and made a little thing. And I made those little bread tags, like all those things that just like little really familiar things as trash objects that are just, so also you were talking about working as an essential worker. Just the way the world's going. That's something that Trader Joe's has been really cool about, is that they still don't do any curbside pickup. People are very upset about it, by the way. They just don't understand it. We don't have any self-checkout lines, because unlike a lot of other companies that are privately owned, nobody owns them. So they've always done the way they've done it, and they really, really, really value customer service. And so that's why they're really resisting this movement to go online. And I'm kind of curious what they're going to do when, if and when that does happen, that everybody goes online. And I think it's also been really humbling because even though I do all the sign stuff, especially in the beginning of my years working there, I was still doing a lot of stocking and register work. And it's very humbling to have a master's degree and then go work at a grocery store for.
I like to always think about my litany of bad jobs. That's the thing I like to share with my students who are getting ready to venture into the world. And I think I started working when I was 11, right? Sweeping floors someplace. And probably that was the first paid work. It was rock picker before that. So the litany of bad jobs helped me, I think, on my way to, I could begin to discern what was good about work and what was bad about work early on, and have kind of made a lot of those small choices that you're talking about. It's like, how do I choose to have a little bit more control over what I produce? Here I'm sitting, you know, it looks luxurious, but it's a modest space, because a modest space is easier to keep up with. And as a person who's sensitive to kind of economic downturns because of my formative years, I've always tried to make sure my footprint wasn't so big that it would collapse if things would change, right? I think that's what a lot of people are faced with. You have so much overhead and leverage that when something misfires, you lose a job or a paycheck is skipped or you're furloughed, that you experience this anxiety around it. You know, just, I'm going to name drop two artists who really influenced and affirmed some of those ideas, but it's like, be quiet, chickens. William, we have chickens, and one of my daughters brought me homemade potato salad. So the sustainability factor, like this is beets and potato salad and eggs from the backyard, right? These
Nice.
These are undocumented chickens. I just want you to for educational purposes. That's what we tell people. But William McDonough, who's an architect, really, I was someone else's commencement speech that I went to, and he spoke about cycles like that, like in terms of sustainability. He said, I looked around and there were no companies that made materials that would last for the life of a chair, which in an office is about 10 years. Your life. And so it was landfilled. And so he had to start a company in order to manufacture the fabric that would be the appropriate length for the life of the chair. And that way it could be recycled, it could be incorporated into other things, it could biodegrade. There were all these types of small choices that we're faced with that add up to improvements. You know, what type of material we choose to work with, how far we take our work, the scale of our work, the heft of our work. These are all small design choices that we can begin to make as artists that inform the footprint of our work in terms of how much damage do we do.
Jim, on that note, I hate to cut you off. I have some really good viewer questions that I want to throw at y'all's way. So someone asks, is there a craft practice or technique that you think should not be sustained? What is hard for you to get rid of in your own personal practices? Ashton, I know you mentioned your oil inks.
Yeah, I think that's really my main thing. And the reason I'm kind of been thinking about it more is because I just haven't invested the time in exploring alternatives. And that's how I think this is the same conversation of like feeling like you have all these, you're trying to do everything. And once you start opening that research up, you're like, everything I do is terrible. And like, you can't, it's like overwhelming in itself. So you kind of have to start somewhere. And that's where I was saying like my shipping, I've worked on, I've also kind of like, I think it was maybe Jim that said that like they haven't bought material in forever. And that's how I feel about like paper. Like I'm still using paper I had since undergrad and grad school that just are all these odd sizes and different types. And then same with my plates. Like I've just reusing the back sides of plates because to me, it's like until I literally can't use it, even though it is more labor intensive to do those things. Those are things that I think. And engraving, you know, is absolutely no acid or anything like that. So that's the other thing I do like about the process that I'm personally doing. But that's the ink for me is the worst because it's just oil based, I guess, is the main problem and disposal of it. Because otherwise I use vegetable oil to clean up. So
you might, and I'm not a printmaker, but you might investigate a group of people up here who have founded a practice called Zea Maize, which is the genus and species of corn, Zeamay. And they're using soy-based inks. And I won't comment on the benefits or the detracting parts of it because I don't know. But they've been very successful in running workshops and putting up gallery shows of work, and it's open studio. You rent time and whatever, but they might be helpful in pointing out the way to using less toxic inks.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, what I would hate to give up would be space. I mean, woodworkers are so, and I started as a woodworker, and so I'm using my woodworking shop as a sculpture studio, but I really have a big footprint. And I guess I justify it by saying that, well, I purchased the building when I was young. I ran a business out of it. The business supported me. I lived there for 10 years when I was single, midlife, and now I have this space. So I'm really in a luxurious position, but I feel like I paid for it. I paid my dues, and now I'm trying to repurpose it and hopefully get it back or rent it out or get other artists to maybe use pieces of it. And that's a huge job because I've filled it up with some sustainable materials and some just stuff. But I've kept so much wood. Sonya was talking about little bits, and I have so many little bits. I need to create a whole practice of using the little bits.
Well, you never know when you're in
exactly. But when you have space and then you have scrap, the two, it's overwhelming. So I'm sort of coming out of a career as a worker for hire, and as Jim said, we never retire. But I'm retiring into my art practice, which again is a luxury. So I'm trying to figure out what to do with all that stuff that I've collected the last 35 or 40 years.
Well, the minute you do like a clear out or something, then the perfect use will like show itself. Like,
right.
Wait.
I have a space called deep storage, which is when I can't find something or I don't want to go to Home Depot, I go up there, and it is a great benefit in many situations. And Ashton showed that slide with the woven strapping from boxes and crates, and I have a collection of that, and I built one piece for an outdoor show years ago. But it's a wonderful material, and it's ugly and it's hard to work with, but there you go. It's like you could have a workshop just on using plastic strapping and have a lot of fun, and everybody could pick dumpsters and get it from businesses like the cardboard she got. There is material everywhere. It just behooves us to find ways to use what's around us creatively, and maybe not give up the raw virgin material. I mean, I like new boards from recently harvested trees, but I'm happy to work with pallet stock and the grapevines and the rest of it.
So how would y'all? I've got another question from a viewer. For a lot of y'all are educators, or you teach classes or workshops in some capacity. How would you steer students into a direction of, more sustainable and eco-friendly studio practices? What advice would you give them?
Well, I kind of touch on what Ashton was saying, but also on this too, that I think that, Ashton was talking about the ink for, I like natural materials. That's what I gravitate to, natural fabrics, linens and cottons. But, for me, the majority of all my thread is polyester. And while there is, you can find 100% cotton or silk or linen thread, that's not what's like mass market, like available in all the colors and everything. So it's, just hearing about your ink, Ashton, made me think about that. And just to get to that idea of, it's not a zero-sum game. You can't just have this, I think that's where we as humans tend to fall down, where we go like, okay, we're going to be like sustainable. I'm going to be green. And then it becomes so overwhelming, or you then paint yourself into a corner of like, oh, but wait, now I can't have this, where it is those smaller changes. Like, okay, can you make sure that your packaging, if you're selling things, can you move away from the plastic sleeves? Like try the wax paper, or other alternatives. Saying like, if you are buying boxes, if you have to buy something, can you source it locally? Can you get away from supporting somewhere like Uline? And just these smaller steps rather than like reaching for the stars, because that's not possible, and you most likely will end up getting like so discouraged if you try and do like everything at once.
Well, yeah, it's almost like, reaching for 100% sustainability is also not sustainable.
Exactly.
Not in this place right now.
Not all at once, yeah.
No, not overnight. Not overnight.
Yeah. I have a quick random thing, if for even the viewers or any of you guys, packing tape, because 3M is like a big, so I don't know, that'd be cool if anybody knows a great alternative for that. So
yeah, let me know too.
Paper-based tape that you can get, like gummed paper tape. I get my packing supplies from Eco Enclosed, where they recycle, and you can get paperback tape. They do sell a cellophane tape, but it's not good. So, I mean, if you want it to just like stick everywhere and it's really thin, but yeah, I'm like at the point where I've sort of as a joke asked for a self-gumming tape machine for my birthday, but then kind of took it back. But I'm like, oh, but oh, those are anyway.
Yeah.
Just one last comment about that for younger artists. You can think in terms of offsets. So we talked a little bit about sourcing materials. Man, if you haven't learned how to dumpster dive, you're not really living. But
that should be the requirement in undergraduate education for material research, right? Make a piece with things that you just found in a nightly walk or out of a dumpster.
But also to address two things that are in short supply is things like foldable money, right? That the young person starting out who's trying to develop a creative practice, probably the resource that they have the least of is that foldable currency. And I have, in terms of sustaining, right, our practice, I would encourage them to ask. There is nothing like visiting a construction site and talking to the foreman. There's nothing like going to the back of the furniture store. Even
done that.
Even your workplace, if you have a day job of some type, look at their waste stream as a potential source of material that they will be thankful that you cart away and do things with. And what we're doing by doing that is we're diverting things that would otherwise be the waste product of our society, and we're creating value. That's what I love, that transformative aspect of what crafts do. It's like, this is otherwise going to be landfilled, but through a little bit of artistic magic, we are producing things that people want, and that's good work, right? That's good work for people to engage in.
On the note
sorry, I was just going to say that's definitely a win-win. Like companies, it's going to, especially right now, like making them look good and green, so it's like, if again, kind of trying to make that a closed cycle, I think is positive.
And the local thing I think is really important, is for folks to realize that if they unless they live way out in the country, small town cities have local businesses and local manufacturers and local industries. And again, their waste stream can be small or big or varied. And they have resources right around the corner that you could have it. I mean, I get boxes from my bicycle shop, and like Jim was saying, from the furniture store. I had to ship huge pieces, and I need a big box. And you go get a box for Lazy Boy, and it's already good to go for trucker or for UPS.
And there are several reuse, like throughout the country. I know here in the Bay Area, we have reuse stores. Oftentimes these are nonprofits where they'll accept donations from individuals or businesses. And I've been in our local one called Scrap and seen art students, there as a field trip, and with their remit is like, you have to, like, this project is, you have to just use the materials you find here. And again, that I think comes to like what we were talking about in the beginning, where it's that the creativity, like having that limitation inspire the creativity rather than just a sort of limitless, like, and making that switch, instead of it being like the inspiration coming and then seeking out the materials, having the materials inform the practice.
The paradox of choice, right? You walk down the cereal aisle in the store and you're overwhelmed by the choices, where it's essentially all the same, right? And I know that that's one of the things that I look for in materials, is like I can open up, all of my pieces are made in denim, but each one is different because I'm examining the material creatively. I'm trying to mine it for everything that it has, and that's really the limits are where creativity, unfurl, really.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
It took me to be at residency, which was a privilege years ago, for a month. And I came out of the dining room one day and I saw the tin cans in the boxes that they were in this little recycle shelter. And I went and asked the chef, I said, can you create more of those? It's like, how many of those are you going to empty in a day or a week? And so I just went from one to the next, from the dining room to the studio, and started cutting apart tin cans. And I had never worked with tin cans. I didn't really know what was going to come out of it, but I made some very simple armatures and then used the tin cans as the skin. And I haven't kept it up. I haven't made, as Jim has probably made, dozens of sculptures with tin cans, but it was just one more thing that was then in your bag of tricks of a material that is out there basically for free. And then I did a replacement for one of those pieces and just went to a pizza shop and got the giant tin cans. And they were curiously amused. They didn't think I was crazy, but they were, kind enough to say, sure, come back in 3 days and we'll have a bag of them. So it's out there.
This is another question from an audience member. Now that we're living in a pandemic, how has the acquisition of your materials, say if you're dumpster diving or if you're looking for those kind of freebies out there, how has this pandemic affected that process for y'all?
I guess for me, as I was saying before, I've been at this for so long that I have sort of a surplus. So I'm fortunate in that regard. But the most recent pieces are using broken and found tools, rusted tools. And so as soon as I started posting images from my show, I got emails from people who are cleaning out their sheds and collected more tools, but they're also on the curb. I mean, one of my things about curbside is that nothing is built as sturdy as the 60 Kenmore sewing machine or whatever. I have routers from the 80s. So there's so much stuff on the curb. And I live in a good sized city that has street collection. So it's just out there every day. You just have to humble yourself into not being embarrassed about stopping and getting out of your car and picking it up.
Yeah, I have a 2-mile circuit that I walk from my house. We're not driving very far these days, but that 2-mile walk, I have found 3 sewing machines in the last.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
And
would think the opposite, because I think everybody's been picking up hobbies more.
Recently things have changed. I can tell you that. There's a lot more people interested in sewing, and I think it is an important skill. So if people are interested, Sonya, I hope that you'll join me in telling everybody, don't be scared of your sewing machine. Your bobbin is your friend, right? There's, it can seem a little intimidating at first, but there are plenty. It's one of the greatest communities of artists that you'll ever run into, is people who are willing to help you with your sewing machine. So I would encourage people to pick
I
it
tell
up.
people, just, you can use vintage sewing machine, vintage bobbins. Just, don't if you think something's wrong with your sewing machine, change your needle, change your thread. Those are like the two major things. Like, first check if you've threaded it correctly, and then don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I was gonna say, I've never bought an ironing board. I've those are things I'm like, why pay money for that? I always see them, and you just get a new cover or make a new cover for it. And the point now where people point them out to me, I'm like, I don't need any more. I have.
I like to tell people I'm a sewing machine steward at this point. I don't actually own them.
Yeah. You're caring for them for the next generation.
It gets to be a little bit of a problem. So I try to make sure they're useful, but you approach 9 sewing machines in the studio, and you have to make hard choices. Like, you keep pretty ones, you think about which ones you use most often, which ones have sentimental value. And then what's great is you can take those that excess of whatever you happen to have, and you can literally spawn the next generation of artists, right? You just hand a kid a sewing machine, and suddenly they have the means of production, and you don't know where that's going to lead. That's one of the little joys of doing what we do.
This machine fights fascism. Yeah.
That's right.
All right, y'all, I have one more question. We have 1 minute, so quick choices here. When has what you have found as a material profoundly changed the look of your work?
Well, just going on the finding things on the side of the road. I found a sewing machine on the side of the road. It was a Singer. I don't have it anymore, but it was broken, or it was not working to where it would only sew at half speed. And I sewed almost like a good chunk of my dresses on that, because it was just like, it was slow enough. And since then I found another machine that has variable speed, but just that was just the right speed for me to like gain my confidence. And that it was one of these driving, is that a sewing machine? Stopping the car. Is it just the case or the sewing machine? And I don't know. It was one of these like serendipity, because I have my mom's old machine that's from the 60s, but it's temperamental, probably much like my relationship with her. I think she's like imbued it with some difficulty. But prior to that, I'd always been fighting with machines. And so, it was sort of magic right there.
I think for me, like, I've been pretty traditional with my prints, but this past year I really I think actually at Arrowmont, when I coordinate the Pentaculum residency, or the 2D people, the 2D artists, but I started the box weaving, or the box strap weavings. And the picture that we had in this, if you go on my website, there's a section of plastic pickup and you can see them, but I've made them where they're like 3 or 4 feet in diameter or width, and so it's huge for me. This is also because I go to work my schedule until I just cut my hours. When I was working full-time, I'd get there at 7 and we'd have an hour to clear floors before I started doing signs. So I was always picking up, as everybody's finishing up, I'd be picking up, and that's where I started noticing all the waste in our one tiny little store that's a sustainable and very good company, of like one little snippet of that, and seeing all that and bringing that to my work, which is very, I just actually had a critique with one of my studio mates and was just talking about how contemporary it looks for me, when I'm an old school printmaker, trying to, or at least my background seems to be a little more that way. So it's very subject, like it's non-representational. It's very different for me, which is exciting, has a lot of color, and I don't know. So that for me, finding this reusable and resourceable material at work, where I can come in every week and my amazing employee friends like keep just depositing these things, and I come every week and it's like, I have a whole bag of box straps, and I thank them so much, because I know that they are always busy running around. I'm like, you don't have to do it, but they're like, no, I don't want to put it in the trash. Like, and it's like this win-win, and I love it. So I hope to find more things like that.
That's great. All right, y'all. Well, thanks again for joining us for another Instructor Roundtable discussion. Thank you to Jim, to Peter, to Ashton, and Sonya. This has been great. Thank you for sharing your work and your ideas. Later this week, you'll find the recording of our discussion on our website and on our YouTube channel. Keep an eye out on our social media for information on our upcoming Instructor Roundtables, including next month's discussion on Craft Outside. So we hope you'll join us again. And on behalf of everyone here at Arrowmont, be safe and please stay creative. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Yay, thanks.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye, everybody. It was nice seeing you.
Bye. Yeah, you too.